Yeah. Got over money. Pistol.
There was a very interesting story that I always remember early on in my childhood, is that my granddad said when I was born, as the story goes, that I was going to be a preacher. The story always stood out to me in different times in my life. I don't remember him ever saying that. Probably was too young for that. But I do remember he had a church that he was very instrumental in. My granddad was a farmer in Mississippi, based from Mississippi. He had a lot of networking capabilities within the community, had a lot of land. Everybody knew CJ. And there was a church called West Camp Baptist Church that he was very instrumental in the construction of it and, putting money into it. Anyhow, he had me very much involved in his church, choir, church-related events, everything. And I remember those. I still, to this day, can remember who I was next to in the choir and going off to these church events, getting baptized. But I also remember that I didn't really understand all of that. I did it, but I didn't really understand all of that. So later on in my early childhood, I began to notice something also too, that I didn't really feel like I fit in. Predominantly my family, their last names were Crow and Williams. My last name is Seymour. And I'm looking around, I don't see too many people that resemble me. I don't hear no one with my last name. So one day, I was about 7 or 8, I asked my mom, as gently and humbly as I believe I could, I said, am I adopted? And she kind of gave me one of them crazy looks, like the question really like shocked her and surprised her, maybe because of my age or whatever. But she was like, nah, why you ask that? And I'm like, well, I don't feel like I belong. And it's like, no one asked my last name. That was the first time at 7 or 8 years old. That was the first time I ever heard my father's name. My actual father, not the man who I call my dad, but my actual father, who has the same name as me. The only difference is his middle name is Arnold and mine is Anthony. And from that point on, I probably only heard his name mentioned maybe 3 or 4 times after that. Usually wasn't in too much of a good light. But never knew my father. Had a dad that our relationship was on and off. Anyhow, I came back to California when I was 11 years old. Got back into California, felt like I was back home. And all those things that my granddad had sold into me just seemed like they just fell apart. Overnight, just fell apart. I remember I stayed in South Central, and it's one particular, I stayed in a lot of places. My mom moved a lot. But there's one neighborhood in particular that it just always stuck with me. I was off of 69th and Main, stayed in the apartments right connected to the liquor store right across the street from Bethune. And that's where the genesis of my thinking as a gang member, as a street savvy person, as a thug, that was the genesis of it. That's where I seen things that I began to emulate. That's where I heard things that I began to repeat. My style, the persona that I became in the streets was formed in that neighborhood. And I didn't even live there that long, but so much happened there, and it impacted me so heavily. One situation I remember very vividly. I was waiting for my dad because he was my dad. I didn't know my father, but that was my dad. I was waiting for him one day. He told me he was gonna come get me. I said, all right. So I get up, I'm ready, I'm getting dressed. My mom like, what you doing? I'm like, my dad coming to get me. I'm getting ready. She was like, I don't know, son. You might want to wait till he get here. I'm like, all right, whatever. So I'm getting ready. Go outside. I'm sitting on the curb. Sitting on the curb off 69th and Main, watching the traffic go by, looking at every car that passed, just thinking it was my dad. He never came. I must have stayed out there all night. Mom came and checked on me, brought me something to eat. She knew I wasn't coming in the house. Stayed out there all night, waiting for my dad. And that's kind of how my story goes. I was always waiting for that love from a father. I was always desiring that connection from a father. And so from having that absent in my life, my story goes into the emotions that comes behind that, the anger, the frustration, the hurt, the pain. And as a young man, how do you deal with that? How do you cope with that? And that's where 69th and Main came into play. The streets provided me a method of coping with these emotions that I had from not having what I desired in my household. So I learned how to deal with my anger. I started expressing my anger just by being a violent type of person. You know what I'm saying? Fighting people, and the more people you beat up, the more people praised you. I started seeing people with money, lowriders, cars, women, and this was the scene. And I was smart enough to see how they was making their money, who was making the money. And I gravitated towards those people, and I began to learn how to do my street hustling and things like that. But there was always, in the back of my mind, there was always this train of thought that I just couldn't rid myself of. My granddad said I was gonna be a preacher, and I never even heard him say the words. I never even heard him say the words. But it was always in my mind, and I remember, man, I was walking down the streets of South Central, man, and I got a gun on me, I'm high. Got drugs on me, man. I'm looking over my shoulder from the cops, looking over my shoulder from enemies, quote unquote. And I remember talking to God, and I'm telling God, I'm not gonna be no preacher. Look at me. I'm not gonna be no preacher. Me talking to God. So these events culminated, of course, in what was a natural destination for me, which was prison. But I remember there was a time when I walked in on my mom. I must have been coming from school or something. I walked into the house and I seen my mom. She had a drink in one hand. She had a cigarette in the other hand. And she had tears coming down her face. I was probably like 12, 13, something like that, 14 maybe. And I'm a mama's boy, big mama's boy. So I walk in and I'm like, Mama, what's wrong? And she say, nothing, son, it's gonna be all right. And I just felt like I had to do something. We was going from room to room, motel to motel, from family spot or a friend spot. Nothing was stable. You know what I'm saying? I'm looking at my mom. I see she's not emotionally stable, and she's going through things with my dad. And I'm like, I got to do something. So when I was 16, or rather 15, my mom and sister went to live in a shelter. And that was the moment when I was like, I just lost everything. I had never been separated from my mom and sister. I lost it. Went out, did some crazy stuff, committed some criminal activities with the hopes of getting some money to help the situation. And I remember when I was incarcerated, either a detective or an investigator, somebody asked me like, did you really think that you was gonna make enough money to change that situation? And that's when they realized, like I realized, that I was a kid thinking like a kid. Cause the plan I had wasn't even sound. I just felt like I had to do something. My emotions had the best of me. Went to prison, had my prison experience, and in prison, I'm hearing the same voice, the same train of thought was coming back to me. You gonna be a preacher. And I didn't convert to Christianity right off the bat. I had my ups and downs, but throughout my time of incarceration, there was one central thought that I continuously remembered, and that was, in order for me to make it through this, I'm going to need something greater than my family, money, an attorney. And the only concept that I had of someone or something that was greater than that was God. So there was always me attempting to turn to him until, finally that point of submission came, and I just got on my knees and cried out to the Father and said, I need you, and I'm forsaking all to come and follow you and be a Jesus follower. And that process didn't happen over time, but like I said, it was a continual process of being humbled, bumping my head against the wall, and hearing this voice in the back of my head that you're gonna be a preacher. Sure enough, I became a preacher. I became a pastor. And the Lord, he didn't just save me, he began to teach me his ways. And I grew up traditionally, a Baptist. So there was a lot of doctrinal things that I just adopted when I became a Christian because that's what I remember. So he brought a young man into my life, this guy with dreads and, always full of life and smiling. But I also was very aware that this man got a testimony, because he wasn't always smiling for the Lord. But what I noticed about him was that he always opened his Bible up. And I just wasn't accustomed to it. I was always accustomed to talking to people about the Lord, but I wasn't accustomed to someone opening their Bible up and saying, do you understand this? And do you know how to get from this point to this point according to the word of God? And that's what the Lord did when he introduced me to Boomer Bennett. He taught me how to discern his will, something that today is just not even really a topic of discussion, even in the Christian community, but it's so central and vital to who we are as Jesus followers. And, he shared with me early on his idea, his vision that the Lord gave him about JesusFollowr. And immediately as he's expressing it to me, just from a clothing perspective, I got it. Christians want clothes, just like everybody else wants clothes, right? So I understood that. But the more and more I became knitted to him, and the more and more he explained the vision to me, I saw that it was more than clothing. It was about our lifestyle. The clothing was birthed from us living as Jesus followers. And we want to present the body of Christ with an opportunity to express themselves as believers, but also to understand the significance of the relationships that God has put in our life. Just like me and Boomer understand the significance of us being together. That's of God bringing us together. That's why we're here today. We did some things in Sayre, Oklahoma. I never heard of Sayre, Oklahoma before I went to Sayre, Oklahoma. I never heard of Longview, Texas before I came to Longview, Texas. And yet this is where the Lord has brought us to do the work that we're doing today. So culmination of all them events led us to where we are today, having a clothing company and wanting to express and share with the brothers and sisters, as well as the world in general, what it is to be a Jesus follower. So you guys stay tuned, and that's what we're gonna share with y'all.